The silence after slaughter is a sound unto itself. No birds sing, no wind stirs the bloodied grass, only the distant groans of the dying and the wet, rhythmic drip of crimson from bent spear. The acrid smoke of burning siege engines mingles with something far more primal, the metallic tang of split armor and shattered bone. But listen closer, beneath the stillness you hear them. The victors, Roman legionnaires moving through the carnage, not as conquerors drunk on glory but as men bound by rituals older than the Republic itself. What they did in these moments, in the sacred hours between triumph and return, would shock even the most hardened modern soldier. This is the story history forgot to tell you. The battle is over. Thousands of Gallic warriors lie scattered across the muddy plain like broken dolls cast aside by the gods. Their painted shields, once blazing with tribal pride, now serve as makeshift stretchers. The Roman eagle standards stand tall against the gray sky, their bronze wings catching the last light of a blood-soaked day. But victory brings no celebration. Not. Centurion Marcus Flavius raises his vine staff, the symbol of his rank, and his voice cuts through the aftermath like a blade through flesh. Form squares. Honor the fallen. What happens next defies every modern assumption about ancient warfare. The legionnaires don't loot. They don't celebrate. They don't even tend their wounds first. Instead, they begin the ritual of the dead. A ceremony so sacred, so deeply embedded in Roman military culture that to break it meant dishonor worse than death itself. Picture this. 6,000 Roman soldiers, their bronze armor dented and streaked with gore, moving in perfect formation across a battlefield strewn with the bodies of friend and foe alike. They step carefully, respectfully around the dead, because in the Roman mind this ground has become sacred, transformed by spilled blood into a temple requiring reverence. First, they gather their own. Every Roman soldier carried a small bronze disc, his tessera bearing his name and unit. But more than identification, it was his ticket to the afterlife. Without proper burial rites, Romans believed a soul would wander forever in the gray wasteland between worlds. Marcus Quintus Severus, 3rd cohort, 10th Legion, found beneath a pile of Celtic shields, his young face turned skyward, eyes clouded like winter frost. They lift him gently. Centurion Flavius himself closes the boy's eyes, whispering the ancient words, Terra te salvet, may the earth receive you. But here's what will astound you. After tending to their own dead, something unprecedented happens. Something that would make these battle-hardened killers appear almost compassionate. The Romans begin collecting enemy dead. Not for trophies, not for desecration, for burial. This wasn't mercy, it was something deeper. The Romans understood that the spirits of unburied warriors, Roman or barbarian, could bring curses upon the living. The battlefield itself demanded cleansing through proper ritual, or it would become a place of haunting, where the restless dead might influence future battle. Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix's nephew lies twisted beneath his war chariot, his golden torque still gleaming around his throat. A Roman optiu, a junior officer, kneels beside him. With careful hands he straightens the young warrior's limbs, places his sword upon his chest and murmurs words in broken Celtic, a prayer he learned from Gallic prisoners, honoring their gods alongside his own. This was Roman discipline, not just the ability to march in formation or hold a shield wall, but the mental fortitude to honor enemies even as their blood still stained your gladius. As twilight deepens, the true ceremony begins. The legionnaires construct 3 massive pyres, the largest for their own fallen Roman soldiers burned with their weapons, their personal effects, small offerings from their surviving brothers in arms. A second pyre for enemy dead, arranged with equal care, their weapons placed respectfully beside them. But the third pyre, this one might disturb you. Upon it they place everything touched by battle that cannot be cleansed. Bloodied clothing, shattered shields, bent spears, even the grass itself torn up in bloody clumps from where the fiercest fighting occurred. The Romans believed that some objects became so saturated with the violence of war that they could never again be pure. They had to be consumed by sacred flame. As the fires roar to life, painting the survivors' faces in flickering orange light, Centurion Flavius draws a bronze razor from his kit. One by one the soldiers approach. He makes a small cut on each man's forearm, just enough to draw blood. They let it drip onto the ground as an offering to Mars Ultor, Mars the Avenger, asking not for more victories, but for the strength to carry the weight of what they had done. Because here's what Hollywood gets wrong. Roman soldiers weren't mindless killing machines. They were deeply religious men who understood that taking a life, even an enemy's life, changed you forever. The blood offering wasn't just ritual. It was acknowledgement. Recognition that they had crossed a line from which there was no return. But perhaps most remarkable of all was what came after the ceremony. As the pyres burned through the night, the survivors didn't sleep. They sat in groups around smaller fires, sharing stories, not of their own heroism, but of the men they had lost. Marcus spoke of young Severus, barely 18, who dreamed of returning to his father's vineyard in Tuscany. Gaius remembered Lucius, the Optiu who could make anyone laugh even during forced marches through German forests. They carved names into wooden tablets, recording not just who died but how they lived. These weren't official military records. Those existed separately. These were personal memorials carried in kit bags back to Rome, to be delivered to families who would never see their sons again. And here's the detail that will give you chills. They carved enemy names to Celtic warriors who had fought with particular courage, who had earned Roman respect even in death. These names would be spoken in Roman camps for generations, becoming part of the legion's oral history, honoring brave enemies as examples of warrior virtue. By dawn, the pyres had burned to ash. The battlefield lay empty except for the black scars where fires had consumed the evidence of human savagery. The legionnaires formed ranks, but something profound had changed in them during those sacred hours. They no longer moved like the eager young men who had awakened before the battle. Their steps carried new weight, the invisible burden of survival, of seeing friends fall, of taking lives in the name of Rome's glory. Many would never speak of what they had done here. They would return to wives and children, to civilian lives carrying secrets that would follow them to their own graves. But they had done something remarkable. In an age when enemy dead were often left for scavengers, when victorious armies typically celebrated with wine and plunder, these Roman soldiers had performed acts of profound humanity. They had honored the dead, all the dead, with rituals that acknowledged the sacred nature of life itself, even life taken in war. This wasn't weakness. This was the discipline that built an empire, the psychological fortitude that allowed ordinary men to function as soldiers, while preserving their souls as human beings. As the legion formed column and began its march back to permanent camp, Centurion Flavius looked back once at the scarred earth, where so many had fallen. In his kit, wrapped in oiled leather, he carried wooden tablets inscribed with 43 names, 43 mothers who would weep, 43 families who would burn incense at empty tombs. But he also carried something else, the knowledge that his men had conducted themselves with honor not just in battle, but in its aftermath. They had proven themselves worthy inheritors of Roman virtue, capable of great violence when necessary, but never forgetting their humanity in the process. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Soon this battlefield would be just another patch of Gallic countryside. Farmers would plow it, sheep would graze here, children would play where warriors had died. The grass would grow green again, fed by ancient blood, and only the stones would remember what had transpired. But the men who walked away carried the memory with them forever, carved into their hearts like names on memorial tablets, a reminder that every victory comes with a price that extends far beyond the moment swords are sheathed. These rituals, these moments of profound humanity amid the brutality of ancient warfare, reveal something timeless about the human condition. The Romans understood what we sometimes forget, that violence, even necessary violence, changes those who commit it. That victory without honor is hollow, that even enemies deserve dignity in death. In our modern world, where conflicts rage across continents and warriors return home carrying invisible wounds, perhaps there's wisdom in these ancient rituals. The Roman legionnaires who knelt beside enemy dead, who carved names of fallen foes into memorial tablets, who let their own blood drip onto foreign soil as acknowledgement of what they had done. They understood something about the cost of war that transcends time itself. The next time you hear about ancient Rome, don't think only of gladiators and golden eagle. Think of young soldiers sitting beside funeral pyres whispering prayers for enemies they had killed. carrying home not just plunder and glory but the sacred responsibility of remembering all who had fallen. Because in the end that's what made them Roman. Not just their ability to conquer, but their capacity to remain human while doing so. After the pyres had cooled to ash, select veterans performed the devotio vulnerum, the consecration of wounds. This wasn't medical treatment. This was something far more primal. Veteran centurions, men whose bodies bore the scars of a dozen campaigns, would examine the fresh wounds of younger soldiers, not to heal them but to read them. Each cut, each puncture, each bruise told a story. A sword thrust to the shoulder spoke of facing cavalry. A spear graze across the ribs meant standing firm in the front rank. Axe marks on the shield arm revealed close combat with Germanic berserkers. These wound readers were living libraries of warfare. They could tell you exactly how a man had fought, where he had stood in formation, whether he had held his ground or faltered, simply by examining his injuries. And then in a ritual that would make modern soldiers recoil, they would mark the most significant wound. Using a bronze stylus heated in the funeral fires, they would trace the edges of cuts that showed exceptional courage. The pain was excruciating, but it served a purpose beyond endurance. These marked scars would never fully heal. They would remain raised, visible, permanent reminders carved into flesh itself. Marcus Quintus bears such a mark across his left forearm, where a Celtic longsword nearly severed the limb as he dragged a wounded comrade from the melee. The scar tissue forms a ridge you can feel through his tunic sleeves, a tactile medal of honor that no emperor could bestow. And then came the most sacred and disturbing ritual of all. As the first light of dawn touched the smoke-blackened battlefield, the surviving members of each contubernum, the 8-man squads that formed the backbone of Roman military organization, performed the sacramentum sanguinis, the blood oath. This wasn't the oath of allegiance every Roman soldier swore upon enlistment. This was something older, darker, more binding than any legal contract. The 8 survivors of Marcus's squad kneel in a circle around a bronze bowl. One by one they draw their pugio, the Roman dagger, across their palms. Not the theatrical surface cuts you see in movies, but deep, purposeful gashes that send dark blood streaming into the bowl. As their life essence mingles, they speak words in archaic Latin, phrases so old that even the centurions aren't certain of their original meaning. But the intent is clear. They are binding themselves together, not just for this campaign, not just for their 25 years of service, but for eternity itself. They drink from the bowl. The taste is copper and salt, warmth and iron. Each man swallows the blood of his brothers, literally incorporating their essence into his own body. From this moment forward, they believe their souls are intertwined. If one dies in future battles, part of him lives on in the others. If one is wounded, they all feel phantom pain. If one commits cowardice, they all share the shame. This is why Roman units fought with such desperate cohesion. It wasn't just training or discipline. It was the belief that betraying your brothers meant betraying part of yourself. But perhaps most shocking of all was the practice of memento hostis, taking personal trophies from fallen enemies. Not weapons or armor, those belonged to the state. Not gold or silver that was distributed according to strict military law. The Romans took something far more intimate. Pieces of their enemies' bodies, hair, teeth, fingernails, small bones from hands or feet. These weren't savage trophies displayed for intimidation. They were deeply personal talismans, carried in small leather pouches, treated with religious reverence. The Romans believed that by carrying pieces of brave enemies, they absorbed their courage, their fighting spirit, their warrior essence. Optio Gaius Maximus carries a Celtic warrior's braided hair, cut from a chieftain who nearly killed him in single combat before falling to a gladius thrust under the ribs. Every night he oils the braid with cedar resin, keeping it supple, speaking to it in whispered Latin, as if the dead warrior's spirit still inhabits those red strands. Modern minds recoil from such practice, but to the Romans this was the highest form of respect, believing that worthy enemies deserved to live on, that their courage shouldn't die with their bodies, that a warrior's spirit was too valuable to waste in the grave. As dawn fully breaks over the battlefield, The most experienced veterans begin the final ceremony, one that would follow these soldiers for the rest of their lives. Using bronze needles and lampblack mixed with the ashes of the funeral pyres, they begin tattooing, not decorative designs but records. Maps of scars, chronicles of battles. Each mark represents a specific moment of courage, a particular act of valor, a named enemy defeated in single combat. The process takes hours. The recipient must remain perfectly still as the bronze needle pierces his skin thousands of times, driving ash-black ink deep into the dermis. No anesthetic exists except the warrior's own willpower. To cry out, to flinch, to show pain means the tattooing stops immediately, and the shame of incomplete markings follows the man forever. Young Lucius Brennus, barely 20, earns his first battle tattoo, a simple line across his collarbone representing his first kill. The Celtic warrior fell to his spear thrust just above the heart, dying with such dignity that Lucius wept even as he twisted the iron point deeper. But veteran centurion Marcus Flavius bears skin like an illuminated manuscript. His arms, chest and back carry the story of 15 years of warfare, thick black lines for major battles, dots for individual enemies, complex geometric patterns marking promotions earned in blood, spirals indicating wounds that should have killed him but didn't. These tattoos serve multiple purposes: their personal history, regimental records, and spiritual protection all merged into living flesh. Other veterans can read them like scrolls, understanding at a glance where a man has fought, how he has proven himself, what he has survived. More importantly, the Romans believe these marks protect the bearer. The ink contains ashes of the honored dead, both Roman and their spirits, bound into the tattoo, watch over the living warrior, warning of danger, lending strength in desperate moments, guiding sword arms with supernatural precision. But all this ritual, all this ceremony, all these sacred practices serve a darker purpose that the Romans understand but rarely speak about. They are buying sanity with suffering. These men have done things that would break civilian minds. They have killed teenagers who fought for their homeland. They have stepped over the bodies of friends to maintain formation. They have heard dying enemies call for their mothers in languages they don't understand. The human mind wasn't designed to process such experiences and remain whole. Without these rituals, the pain of scarification, the binding of blood oaths, the responsibility of carrying enemy trophies, many would simply break. The ceremonies give meaning to meaningless slaughter. They transform random violence into sacred duty. They create bonds stronger than family, deeper than love, more enduring than life itself. When veteran Gaius Cornelius wakes screaming in the night, haunted by dreams of Celtic children he cut down during the sack of their village, his tent mates don't just comfort him with words. They show him their scars, their tattoos, their own trophy pouches. They remind him that his pain is shared, that his guilt is distributed among the brotherhood, that he doesn't bear this burden alone. Now as the legion forms column for the march back to permanent winter quarters, these transformed men face their greatest challenge yet, returning to a world that hasn't changed while they have been fundamentally altered. The civilians they'll encounter, merchants, farmers, artisans, even their own families, cannot comprehend what they've experienced. The gap between soldier and citizen has become an unbridgeable chasm, and everyone knows it. Some veterans will adapt, finding ways to channel their warrior skills into civilian trades. Blacksmiths, bodyguards, gladiator trainers, teachers of the sword. But others will struggle, drinking too much wine, starting fights in taverns, unable to sleep without the comforting weight of armor, jumping at sudden noises, seeing enemies in every shadow. The lucky ones will re-enlist, returning to the only family that truly understands them, their brothers in arms. They'll march to new frontiers, fight new enemies, earn new scars, add new tattoos to their living chronicles of warfare. But they all carry something now that they didn't possess before the battle: the absolute certainty that they are no longer entirely human. They have become something else, something between mortal men and the gods of war themselves. As the column winds through Gallic forests toward Roman territory, Centurion Marcus Flavius reflects on a truth that weighs heavier than his bronze armor. He is part of an unbroken chain stretching back 5 centuries to Rome's founding. His grandfather fought Germanic tribes under Marius. His father died in the civil wars between Caesar and Pompey. His son, now 14, eagerly awaits his own chance to earn the gladius and join the legions. Each generation passes down more than just weapons and tactics. They transmit the rituals, the blood oaths, the sacred practices that keep soldiers sane in an insane profession, the knowledge of which enemies deserve honor, how to read wounds like text, when to mark flesh with permanent memory, how to carry the weight of necessary killing without losing one's humanity entirely. This is Rome's true strength. Not just military technique, but the psychological infrastructure that allows ordinary men to do extraordinary violence and remain functional human beings afterward. 6 months later, the 10th Legion marches through the gates of Rome itself, returning to winter quarters after a successful campaign in Gaul. Citizens line the streets, cheering, throwing flowers, celebrating heroes they cannot understand. But if you look closely, really look, you can see the truth. These men walk differently now. Their eyes scan rooftops for archers, alleyways for ambushes, crowds for potential threat. They stand closer to walls, keep their sword hands free, unconsciously form protective formations even while off duty. Their families embrace them, but feel the difference immediately. Wives touch scars that weren't there before. Children stare at new tattoos creeping up from beneath tunic sleeves. Fathers notice the way their sons' hands drift unconsciously to where sword hilts should rest. And in quiet moments when civilians aren't watching, these veterans find each other. In taverns, in bathhouses, in the shadows of temples, they gather to speak of things that can't be shared with outsiders. They compare new tattoos, display fresh scars, whisper names of the dead. They are bound now by something stronger than law, deeper than friendship, more enduring than blood family. They are bound by shared transformation, by collective trauma made sacred through ritual, by the knowledge that they have crossed together into territory from which there is no return. Was it worth it? As Marcus Flavius lies on his narrow cot in the legion's winter quarters, listening to his tent mates breathe and sleep, he contemplates this question that has no answer. They have extended Rome's borders. They have brought civilization to barbarian land. They have filled the treasury with Gallic gold, secured trade routes, eliminated threats to the Republic. But they have also become something their mothers wouldn't recognize, something their civilian brothers cannot comprehend, something that exists in the spaces between human and monster, hero and killer, protector and destroyer. The rituals, the blood oaths, the scarification, the trophy taking, the tattooed chronicles, all of it served to make sense of senseless violence, to find meaning in meaningless slaughter, to maintain sanity in insane circumstances. Yet Marcus knows, with the certainty that comes only from experience, that part of who he used to be died on that Gallic battlefield. Not in the fighting, he survived that but in the aftermath, in the sacred hours when they honored the dead and marked the living, something essential was transformed forever. He is no longer entirely human. None of them are. They have become something else, something necessary for Rome's survival, something that allows civilization to sleep safely behind walls built with barbarian bones. Whether that transformation was worth the cost is a question for philosophers and historians. For the men who paid the price, there is only the knowledge that it cannot be undone. Dawn approaches, and soon the Legion will rise for another day of training, preparation, maintenance of the military machine that has conquered half the known world. But in these quiet pre-dawn moments, Marcus touches the ritual scars on his arms, feels the raised flesh where bronze styluses traced the edges of honorable wounds. He thinks of young Severus, whose ashes they scattered in a Tuscan vineyard, of the Celtic chieftain whose braided hair Gaius Maximus still carries, of all the enemy warriors whose names they carved into memorial tablets, honoring courage regardless of the side it served. The Romans understood something profound about warfare that modern armies struggle to grasp, that soldiers are not machines to be programmed and deployed, but human beings who must be psychologically prepared for the transformation that combat inevitably brings. The rituals, brutal and strange as they might seem to modern sensibilities, serve to acknowledge that transformation, to make it sacred rather than simply traumatic, to bind the transformed together in brotherhood rather than leaving them isolated in their alienation. Whether those ancient practices were wise or barbaric, effective or destructive, is perhaps less important than recognizing what they represent. Humanity's eternal struggle to find meaning in violence, dignity in degradation, Brotherhood in brutality. The lesson for ages. As the sun rises over Rome's 7 hills, painting the marble temples and brick insulae in shades of gold and crimson, the lesson of these ancient warriors echoes across the centuries. Every generation must find ways to honor those who serve in humanity's darkest necessity. Every society must develop rituals to transform trauma into meaning, isolation into brotherhood, senseless violence into sacred duty. The specifics change. We no longer tattoo chronicles on living flesh or drink mingled blood from bronze bowls, but the need remains constant. Veterans of every era return home changed by experiences civilians cannot fathom, carrying memories too heavy for individual hearts to bear alone. The Romans, for all their brutality, understood that soldiers needed more than medical treatment for their wounds. They needed spiritual infrastructure, psychological frameworks, sacred bonds strong enough to support the weight of what they had done and seen and survived. Modern societies struggle with this same challenge, seeking ways to honor military service while acknowledging its costs, to welcome warriors home while recognizing they can never fully return to who they were before. Perhaps there is wisdom in remembering these ancient rituals, not to replicate their specific practices, but to understand their deeper purpose, creating meaning from chaos, brotherhood from shared trauma, honor from necessary violence. In the end, that may be the most important lesson these Roman soldiers can teach us across the gulf of 2 millennia, that those who serve in war's terrible necessity deserve not just our gratitude, but our commitment to honoring their transformation, supporting their brotherhood, and sharing the weight of what we have asked them to carry. These stories of forgotten history, of humanity preserved in moments of darkness, of rituals that transform trauma into meaning, deserve to be told and retold, until we understand not just what happened but why it mattered then and why it still matters now. If you're drawn to these untold chapters of our past, these human moments that reveal the eternal struggles of the warrior's heart, then join us on this journey through history's hidden corridors. Subscribe to walk these ancient paths with us, to discover the rituals and practices that helped ordinary people survive extraordinary circumstances, and to let the echoes of the past inform the wisdom of the present, because in every age and every conflict, it is not the sword that defines the warrior but how he sheathes it when the battle ends, and how his society helps him carry the weight of what he has done in service to something greater than himself. Until we meet again in these halls of memory, may we remember that the price of civilization has always been paid by those willing to be transformed by violence so that others might sleep in peace.